Standing up in McKinney, this is According to Callows. It is episode 624, coming to you on the 22nd of April, the year of our Lord, 2024. Today is going to be a Monday update program. I don't have a pithy answer for what I'm going to call it just yet, but on Mondays, we like to stay local. We like to just kind of talk about different things that may have happened, particularly in the last week in my hometown. I'm coming to the conclusion that while 50% of the time this is the largest downloaded episode I do, I also think that it might be the limiting factor, right? If you spend all your time talking about local stuff, the people in other states or even other counties within my state don't want to listen. Well, if all I cared about was having, 2,000 listeners to every episode, that would be uber concerning. But what I'm more concerned about is building up a local audience, building up people here that want to be active, want to be informed. And look, as I've always said, I don't want you to take everything I say at absolute face value. I want you to feel free, and I encourage you to go double check, do your own investigation. Maybe you find out something that I didn't know, or maybe you find out some mitigating circumstances that changes my opinion. That's all great. That is part of the show. It is supposed to be at least partially interactive. But before we get into those updates, let me remind you, the biggest thing you can do, the only thing I ask you to do at this time is to like, share, and subscribe to the program. That's right. Use your network. Use your social media of choice and tell people that we're here and we're doing this. We aim to be here 5 days a week, give you about 30 minutes of material every day, Monday through Friday. The idea being that there are things that go on that don't necessarily get reported or certainly don't get outside of their own echo chambers. And let's be honest, we all live in echo chambers. We all have silos. We tend to flock with birds of a feather, if you will. And that's okay, but you also have to be willing to look into and listen to people that have opposing or slightly differing views. You have to be willing to accept that maybe, just maybe, you don't know everything about everything. Hey, I'm guilty of it. Why would I expect you to be any different than me? That being said, I have a page and a group over at Facebook. I am pro at Gab, and I still drop in at MeWe. And while we're at it, let me remind you that you can still catch this show over at YouTube. Now, I've considered my options for quite some time here, whether or not it's worth the investment to doing anything on Rumble or Brighteon or anything like that. And at this time, it's just not a good fit. I feel comfortable with what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, though I will be freely admitting that I could do more. I wish I could do more, but life just doesn't allow that right now. If you want to make a change, if you want to help me make the change, the best way is, again, sharing the program, subscribing to the program, following the program. Those are all the things that make a difference. And with that, here we go, on with the program. All right, so over the last few days, I have seen a couple of posts shared by one of my city council members. And if I'm honest, that probably is one of the, two guys or two people on the city council that I politically line up with the least. That being said, that does not necessarily mean that that person's a bad person or a bad guy, if you will. It just means that whatever the political philosophies are, we're off quite a bit. However, I've given him kudos before, and I'm going to give him again. He sent out a fairly detailed explanation of what at least one of the bonds is going to be supporting. That is the road improvements. Now, I have mixed feelings on all the money that the cities spend on things that, well, quite frankly, I call bad investments. The private public partnerships usually end up costing us more money than what we're led to believe. But if it's actually building business or attracting more businesses, it's kind of an accepted cost. I've made peace with it. Not a big fan, but I've made peace with it. when you do improvements, particularly if they're citywide improvements, then yeah, that's something the city has to shoulder the burden on. Everybody benefits, or at least potentially benefits, so fair play. When we're talking about roads, now, if you want a very detailed explanation of how all this works and why it's a bit of a challenge to stay on top of this and why it usually causes you to take on more debt as a city, you're going to need to go to Strong Towns. They have a page, they have a bunch of videos, and they explain this in detail. And I've referenced it a time or two before. I'm actually very happy that they're out there and they're doing this work. And again, not necessarily subscribing to all their political positions beyond that, not looking for necessarily all of their solutions, but understanding the problem, understanding what's going on behind it is helpful for people like myself that don't have all this time to invest into looking into this, to at least get a better understanding of why things are the way they are and what could we potentially do to make them better or improve the situation long term. Now, based upon what I've seen there, it kind of seems like it's baked into the city. It's something that's not avoidable. And I've tried to explain this in the past, and I always felt like people didn't want to hear what I was saying. So I'm going to try it one more time. In the older parts of the city that were already built out, there is a sunk cost there. And you do your basic maintenance, and you can build that into your budget. But when the time comes to rebuild, the city is often faced with a choice. Do we spend, and we're just going to make up a number here, $20 million adding new roads that helps our city grow and brings more people to the tax base? Or do we take that $20 million and rebuild roads in part of town that are already in existence? Now, I can hear some people right now, they're saying, well, yeah, obviously you have to keep up your infrastructure and you want to make sure that you stay on top of those things. Yes, that's true. But if you're looked at, I can spend $20 million on repairing a road that already exists or rebuilding a road that already exists, but I have people there that are already kind of stuck, or I can spend $20 million adding new roads to bring more people in, which in fact brings in more money to the city. It seems very obvious which direction they're going to go. And that's kind of the way the system's set up. I mean, you can't get mad, and it kind of transcends the, right, left, Republican, Democrat issue here. It's more of what is the fiscally responsible thing to do, no matter what your positions are. Well, obviously you want to grow. Obviously you want to expand your tax base. So you're going to be less likely to go reinvest in something that you already have. It becomes less of a priority. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be taken care of. But the odds are that most cities are going to default to always expanding and always building more. Just the way the world works. You don't have to like it, but you have to understand it. So to that end, I think we're spending $254 million of bond money to rebuild large sections of road, which, again, past due, necessary, looking forward to those improvements and those repairs. And I'm glad that, for what it's worth, that Justin Beller took the time to kind of lay it out in layman's terms. Now, I know it was probably in the community impact to some degree, but to have it up on social media for other people to see is helpful, useful, and quite frankly, is part of communicating with your constituents. So kudos to the gentleman for doing the right thing. And that's not saying that nobody else has not done it or that nobody else is doing a bad job. It just means that this is kind of the expectation that I would have. And if one person does it, that may be adequate. But I'd sure like to see other members of the city council chime in on this. And I'd like to get their thoughts or positions on it. Though I will tell you that I've learned a long time ago that typically when the decisions are made at the city council, nobody says anything. They're all in lockstep. And it's not just unique to McKinney, by the way. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's the way it is. All right. So we're going to move on a little bit. Slightly different thing. Improvements, right? You want improvements in your city or your town or your community or your county. And there's a couple of different ways you can go about doing it. And this is where the CDCs, which is the Community Development Corporation, and then there's the Economic Development Corporation. Now, they'll have different names depending on where you're at. They look to incentivize businesses or attractions coming to your city. Now, depending on how aggressive they are, they can do some really great things, but they can also cause long-term damage or what I would call secondary issues. Now, once again, I think in many ways, my city, and again, I want to be honest, almost all of these issues long predate the current mayor. And whether you like the current mayor or not, I don't see them as his fault. I don't know that I necessarily agree with how they were addressed, but again, say what you want, at least something is being done. And again, it's not entirely on one person. It is the entirety of the city council that takes responsibility. So when you look at the big four, right? Plano, Frisco, McKinney, Allen. And I guess it's now in population order since Frisco's passed us up. But Plano is past its peak. Frisco is at its peak, perhaps passing it. McKinney is not sure where we're at, and Allen is still going. Now, what's unique to this is Frisco is not built out, but they really, I don't know what else they could possibly get as far as major attractions or corporations in Frisco. They've done an excellent job of basically surpassing Plano in many ways. Plano's nearly built out. I mean, they're reinventing some certain areas, and they're kind of reimagining what they might be able to do in other areas. Sadly, before we get there, and I guess the same could be said about Allen. They're basically geographically locked in. There's nowhere else left for them to grow, and they're trying to experience how can they make it as family friendly as possible. That is their goal, right? I mean, you heard me interview the three people that I've now endorsed running for city council, and they all have a very similar vision. Now, again, I'm not a fan of everybody being in lockstep and everybody being on the same mind, but a general agreement or a general idea as far as a goal is great. Now, McKinney has kind of the best of all worlds, right? We've got areas that need to be redeveloped. We've got areas that we haven't even expanded into, and actually we have a ton of land that is in the ETJ or in the vision to be built out, and it's a question of what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. And the concern is that in our quest to retake the number 2 spot, if you will, in the growth versus Frisco, we're going to make some mistakes. Now, it's real easy to look at things and see, well, why would they want to put in high density multifamily housing? Well, it's kind of an easy thing to grow your population, and developers always want to build this. Now, it doesn't, in my opinion, benefit the community or the locality where it's put in all the time. And a lot of these apartment complexes are super nice when they start out, right? The first 5 or 10 years, it's nice, but there's a lot of costs that come up after the fact. And as those complexes degrade in desirability, that has a downturning effect on the areas surrounding it. So I've always cautioned, I say that like I'm in a position to demand or direct things, but when you're in these issues and you're talking to people, I've always cautioned them that you're going to have some amount of apartment complexes, some amount of high density housing. It's a question of how many units, in what location, and does it make sense for the transportation or what do they call it? Infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that's present. The underlying principle being is we want to, I guess, stack and pack where it makes sense, right? Easy access to roads, easy access to transportation to the jobs or where people are headed. But on the flip side of that, and there's also a cost. They're always looking for cheaper places to build. Now, in Collin County, it's extremely expensive to build anything. And if you're going to go put in a business In many ways, a business is a much bigger risk or gamble to build it out and whether or not you're going to make a profit or be able to stay open than throwing in multifamily housing, particularly when it's higher density. Now, I believe sometimes this can be done very well. But again, it's all built on the premise that the builder wants to get their cut. The developer wants to get their cut. They're not willing to go slow and steady and do things in a way that have a greater long-term output. They want their money upfront and fast and as much as they possibly can. So the cities lose on this. The people that move into those developments often lose on it. At the end of the day, only those first movers get the real money. The benefit and the cost is, or I should say, the short-term benefit and the long-term cost are borne by the communities and the cities that they dump these things into. But again, some of this can be mitigated or at least directed by the cities if they're willing to work and negotiate this stuff out front. Oftentimes, the power players get in positions of influence and it becomes a challenge, right? You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you when you're an elected official. I mean, we see this all the time. It doesn't matter if it's an R or D or even quote unquote a nonpartisan position. The money's always at play. The people always feel like they're captured and must dance to the tune played by the person that's paying the bills. So let me ask you, if you're willing to set aside whatever partisan view you have on apartment complexes, could you envision a development that is on a smaller scale, more geographically dispersed, and instead of throwing up giant units that have, 100 apartments in one building with perhaps retail on the first floor or parking garages, integrated into it, could you see, doing the mid-size multifamily, maybe a building that has 12 or 24 units, in a semi-suburban setting, right? If I'm going down El Dorado Parkway and I see some of these office buildings, would it be bothersome or upsetting if you're on Virginia or I guess even University at this point, and you see a complex that's maybe offset a little bit, or maybe behind a shopping center, if you will, and it has 24 units in a single building on the same plot of land? We have to deal with the idea that everything is so expensive and everything has a cost that, quite frankly, is a burden on a lot of people. If we understand that there's a cost to live in Collin County, a cost to live in McKinney, that's fine. But if the people can't afford to come to work, those businesses that are set up to serve the general population fail. If you can't find space that is appropriate, if you don't have a mix, if you will, of available housing solutions, you run into a problem. Now, look, at no point will you ever see me to be championing Section 8 housing. I don't think it's necessary, and two, I think it's detrimental almost always. But I do think it is probable that if you figured out a way to build smaller homes with lesser expensive materials in a more dense pattern, or if you put, let's call them medium-sized apartment buildings in different areas within the city, you might accomplish and get some of the mix that you're looking for without drastically altering the vibe or the culture of an individual community within the city. Dumping 5 or 10 buildings that have 30, 40 units themselves in there, that alters everything. You're dropping down 1,000 people where there used to be a couple hundred. I mean, just think about what that does. Think about the burdens on the water, the electric, the roads, access. I wonder if anybody sees anything beyond the dollar signs. I mean, obviously the developer wants it because he wants his money. Obviously the builder wants it because they want their money. Obviously the city doesn't mind so much because, hey, it makes our population grow. But if you talk to people that have lived there, some of them like it. In short term, it's necessary and it's probably somewhat comfortable. But the people that, I don't know, work in first responding units, they don't have such a high thought process on that. I wonder why that might be. And again, we're trying to be gracious. We're trying to look at the bigger picture. We're trying to acknowledge that there is a use. There is a need for some of these. But could we do a better job of it is really the question. In many ways, I imagine if you go back and visit those folks over at Strong Towns, they might have some ideas on this as well. And when you're talking about improvements to the city, this also goes into your parks, right? We already talked about roads at length, the infrastructure plant, if you will, and other attractions or facilities within the city. And you want to attract them in, and that's why you have the incentive programs that we talked about earlier. But if you're giving away the farm and you're at best breaking even, is that really what's best for the community, for the city? I wonder. And look, you don't get to see all those numbers, and I would imagine that the people that vote on it and approve it don't even actually see the real numbers. But as always, the politics in this situation is unavoidable, right? I mean, how many times have you heard me say over 620 episodes that you can ignore politics, but politics won't ignore you, right? You can dislike politics, but that politics doesn't care. You can not care about politics, but politics cares about you. There are so many ways of looking at this that I just wonder if maybe, just maybe, people can set aside these little things and consider what other options might be, right? Can you wrap your head around that maybe, just maybe, something that you as an individual don't like could actually be a net positive? Is it possible? If you're not willing to do that, are you doing anybody a favor? Now, I'm not suggesting that we should just let everything run roughshod, but I am suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we have to be willing to set aside our personal preference and look at the bigger picture. I mean, we all have our personal preferences, right? But then we don't want to get involved. We want to stay out of it. We don't like politics. It's dirty. It's messy, whatever. That's fine. Now, it kind of reminds me of, again, the movie that I've been talking about off and on for 2 weeks now. They reference the idea that, hey, there's this thing going on. They say, yeah, we know. We're just trying to stay out of it. And from what we see on TV, maybe that's for the best. I think that's what people do when they hear about the politics of the situation. They just don't want to be involved. They want to avoid it. And I think that's a mistake. I think being engaged and having an open-minded conversation and be willing to hear the other person out is what's better for everybody. All right, now if you'll bear with me, I think I've finished my updates. There really isn't anything more, right? The drama never ends. I'm going to spare you any more on that, if you will. But final thing that is related but not related. You saw the correlation I made to the movie. So, having listened to other people who have discussed it at length and talking to some people I know, I've come to the conclusion that, one, I've probably overrated the movie. And I say that knowing full well that I did from the get-go, mostly because I was just excited that somebody was doing this movie. Even though it wasn't everything that I'd hoped it would be, it was done. It was kicked off the conversation. I think it's going to be long-term helpful. People need to be willing to talk about these issues or these possibilities and how could maybe we avoid them, right? Secondarily, I think I made a couple of discoveries, if you will. I heard people talking about the four main characters really had no depth, no interest. Well, I would say that one of the four did. And one of the four actually had what I would call some buy-in. The other three, not so much, right? I wouldn't call them cardboard characters, but I would just say that nobody got emotionally invested with it. Or, well, I shouldn't say that. That's what the people reviewing it said. And I will say that upon further reflection and after the movie, yeah, they called it. I missed it because I was caught up in the story and the characters became a secondary issue, I think. But after it was done and over with, none of the characters really stuck with me. The other thing I thought was kind of funny is, directly related to this, is so you got your boomer, your Gen Xers, and then a millennial. And what I saw out of the movie is the boomers were past their prime. It was Gen X's time, but they needed to hand the torch off to the millennials. I'm sorry. The boomers never let go. They never went away. We're still dealing with them as a generation. And for whatever good they provided, I think we've long outlasted that net positive that we got from them. The Gen Xers, we're just tired of the crap. Sorry. We're just tired of it. We want to be able to get stuff done. We want to be able to make a difference. We want to be able, I don't know, to try running things for a bit. And we're being told, at least subconsciously in this movie, that our time is over. We need to hand it off to the millennials. That was the other thing I took away after further reflection and hearing other people talk about this. And I got to tell you, no. No. Now, do I believe there are lots of millennials out there that have potential? Sure. Do I think they're ready for prime time? Man, no. But I imagine at this point in my life, 20 years back, the boomers felt the same way about me or other people like me. So the difference is the boomers never, ever, I shouldn't say that. That's not fair. That's really not fair. Let's say boomers as a generation saw zero effort or interest put into, preparing Gen X to take over. Right? There was no handoff. There's no passing of the torch. They wanted to hang on to that as long as absolutely possible as a generation. And we as Gen X were like, whatever, we're just going to do our own thing. We don't care. We did care, but it was like we made peace with it. We've moved on. It's done. It's over with. That we can continue to do battle or we can go do our own thing. And I think most of us chose as a generation just go do our own thing. Not to get tied down or beat down by the fact that the boomer generation just never let go. But now the same generation that basically prevented us at large from taking any positions of responsibility or power or however you want to define that have now deemed that it's time for the millennials, which is kind of their shadow or echo generation, if you will, that they should take over. And I look at the millennials and by and large, they don't know what sex they are. They don't know what time it is. They've got complete disdain for anything that requires them to make a hard decision. And quite frankly, they seem entirely lost if they're not in front of their device. And I say that as a Gen Xer who likes his devices. I'm not quite ready, I'm not quite ready to do that. But what I will tell you, and I think this is a defining thing for Gen X, at least for me, I can't speak for the entirety of my generation. We've been willing to work with the millennials. Now, most of us roll our eyes at a lot of the nonsense, but we've been willing to work and train them up and show them kind of the ropes, if you will, and invest in them, especially the Zoomers, because, well, they're less annoying, I guess. We've been willing to invest in them as well because we at least understand we're not going to be here forever. And most of our time to shine, if you will, was overshadowed by the boomers that never went away. And maybe this isn't fair. Maybe this is a gross generalization. But I'm not confident that handing it off to millennials is the right call. I would almost rather stick around for another 5 or 10 years and get the Zoomers ready. Because I think they're going to do a better job. I really do. Whether the outcome predicted in this movie or any of the other dystopian novels ever comes about, I have more faith in the Zoomers than I do in the millennials. Just if we're going to talk in gross generalizations about generations, that's just how I see it. In any case, I guess that's it for today. No more. I'll be back tomorrow. And until then, I will see you on the other side.